Hey everyone, excited to be back for this week's edition of Frequently Asked Questions for Commercial Real Estate. In today's video, what I want to do is talk about a terminology that's extremely prevalent and important in the commercial real estate landscape, and that is what exactly is a co-broker. So we're going to explain the definition of what a co-broker is, and then explain the mechanics of operating within that space such that you can maximize the value you achieve within the marketplace. Now, before we dive in this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you can like and subscribe to this channel. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and ensures more and more people can hear this message and learn about the many facets of commercial real estate. So now you've done that, go ahead and like and subscribe below. Let's go ahead and dive into this episode. All right, so the question is, what exactly is a co-broker? Well, I typically use an example of residential real estate because it's a little bit easier to understand, and also it's just something that everyone has had to do at least once in their life, or will plan to do at least once in their life. So as an example, let's imagine that you're looking to sell a home, right? So you would approach a broker or a brokerage and say, hey, I'm looking to get representation to sell my home. You would sign a listing agreement with that brokerage, and then they'd go out there and market your property to the broadest possible audience. At some point, most of the time, what ends up happening is an agent comes with a buyer, and then usually what would end up happening is the broker would participate or cooperate with the other brokerage to help with the sale of the property. That's where the co-broker comes in. The co-broker is the other broker involved in the transaction. So if you were the seller, your broker is the people representing you would be the broker, the main broker, the listing broker, and then the buyer's agent would be under a brokerage. Therefore, if you two combine to participate in the the brokering of the sale, and you actually complete the sale, that would be considered a co-broker, right? The co-broker would be the buyer's representative. And typically in these agreements, the listing agent would have a listing agreement with the seller, and there would be a commission involved that would be earned at the sale of the property. And that commission typically would be split between both brokers. Now, in the commercial real estate landscape, there are oftentimes situations where the listing broker will not cooperate with another broker. Therefore, they say, okay, we have our commission that's agreed to with the seller. And if a buyer's agent comes with a buyer that's wanting to buy the property, you can quote unquote represent them, but we will not cooperate with you, meaning we will not share in the commissions for the transaction to take place. Now, this is a relatively common practice in commercial real estate. I don't know how common it is in residential real estate, but it is something that I've seen in the landscape before. So as far as things to look out for, oftentimes when I sit down with seller clients that are looking to sell their property, I think one of the things you really need to understand is understand how the listing agent that you're going to be working with is cooperating with other agents or other brokers in the landscape. Now, the reason for this is because most of the time, brokers are the ones who bring buyers to the transaction. It's just part and parcel of just being in the business on a day-to-day basis. They have relationships with buyers. They have relationships with owners of other properties. And so oftentimes they leverage those relationships to source opportunities for, their buyers. So if you were listing your property, it would behoove you to work with a broker who's willing to cooperate, because that opens up the broadest buyer pool possible. Now, if they're not willing to cooperate, oftentimes what ends up happening is that other brokers in the marketplace are not going to be as enthusiastic about bringing opportunities to the table, because they have to find a way to get compensated for their time and effort. So oftentimes what ends up happening is that if a buyer wants to buy the property and they want to have representation by someone, they themselves will have to come out of pocket to pay the broker that's ultimately representing them. So that kind of leads us to the second step. So I've been in scenarios in the past where, we've seen properties, and one of the properties that I had a buyer interested in, the listing agent was unwilling to cooperate in the commission. And so what ended up having to happen is I had to have a conversation with my buyer client saying, look, if you want me to represent you in this transaction, what was going to happen is if you buy this property, we're going to have to sign a separate commission agreement saying that you will pay me a commission for representing you in this particular transaction. And so that was somewhat of an uncomfortable conversation that you have to have. And, luckily they were willing to do so, but, unfortunately the transaction didn't work out. But again, it's just one of those situations where it's not as common of a transaction or a common of a conversation that occurs. So sometimes having that conversation with your buyer client that wasn't necessarily expecting to pay a commission on a transaction like that is something that can be kind of uncomfortable as well. So again, when you're working in the commercial real estate landscape as a broker, always, always, always ask if the other agent is willing to cooperate. And if they are willing to cooperate, what is the cooperating commission, right? It's not always going to, you can't always assume that you know the cooperating commission. You know, it's not always going to be a set number. So you always kind of just have to ask that question as an agent. Along with that, if they're not willing to cooperate, you got to be willing to have that uncomfortable conversation with your buyer client or your leasing client saying, look, this is the situation. They're not willing to cooperate. So in order for me to get compensated, I need you to sign the separate commission agreement that will say that if we do, in fact, get to the closing table or get to the final lease agreement, that you're willing to, compensate me for my efforts and my services. And so that's something to consider. And then finally, as we mentioned at the beginning, if you yourself are looking to sell commercial property, it would behoove you, I would highly recommend that you speak to whatever the brokers that you're interviewing for this particular transaction and ensure that they're willing to cooperate with other brokers. Because if they are not willing to cooperate with other brokers, they will most likely not open up the opportunity to the broadest possible landscape. And so that's my recommendation to you. So if you yourself are looking to buy, sell, or lease commercial property here in Louisville, Kentucky, feel free to reach out to me. I'm a broker in town, happy to help you facilitate that transaction. Along with that, if you guys like this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you can like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact in our ability to reach a broader audience, and we would greatly appreciate the support. Thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.